The Duke family's outing on August 10, 1996, from their home in Green River, Wyoming, took a tragic turn that no one could have foreseen. That fateful afternoon, 22-year-old Liana Duke and her 5-year-old son Erik slipped and fell to their deaths from a 200-foot cliff in Sweetwater County, Wyoming. They left behind a grieving husband and father, Mr. James Robert Bob Duke. Unable to reach them, he called the authorities in hopes that they could be saved. Sadly, by the time officers arrived, it was already too late. As more officials arrived at the scene, they worked to unravel the mystery of the deaths on the cliff, trying to determine whether it was a tragic accident or if there was something more to the story. Detective Mont Meacham strongly believed that the deaths of Liana Duke and her son were not accidental. To prove his theory, he needed answers to two crucial questions: who would want to harm the young mother and her child, and what could anyone possibly gain from their deaths? The case unfolded in Green River, Wyoming, a picturesque river town surrounded by diverse wildlife and majestic cliffs. With a population of 11,825 residents, this peaceful town served as the county seat of Sweetwater County. The tight-knit community loved hunting, fishing, and observing wildlife together, creating a close bond among its residents. In this town, our story began. Liana Mae Davidson was born to Ralph Wayne Davidson and Rosalie West Davidson on January 4, 1974. Liana was a reserved and shy child, yet incredibly intelligent. Her school records reflected her excellence as a straight-A student. As she grew older, she became a beautiful young woman with long brown hair, her dreams filled with ambitions of finishing high school and attending college. However, her aspirations were put on hold when she met Robert Bob Duke. At 17, Liana and Bob began dating, quickly becoming inseparable. Like many other teenagers in love, Liana believed that nothing could disrupt their perfect relationship. However, reality soon struck when Liana became pregnant at the age of 17. Overwhelmed with fear, Liana struggled to find a way to inform her Mormon parents about the situation. Eventually, the truth emerged, and both Liana and Bob's parents exerted pressure on the couple to do what they believed was right. Following their high school graduation on May 25, 1991, Liana and Bob decided to get married. It was a joyous occasion for everyone involved. Despite not pursuing higher education, Liana had already accepted the responsibilities that came with expecting a baby. Shortly after their marriage, Liana and Bob welcomed their son, Erik Robert Duke, on August 8, 1991. Despite her young age, Liana embraced motherhood with grace and skill. Liana was a devoted wife and a fiercely protective mother. She cared for Erik at home while Bob was at work, and in her free time, she immersed herself in crafts. Her home was adorned with homemade crafts, knickknacks, and wreaths, a testament to her creative spirit. Liana enjoyed crafting so much that she dreamed of opening her own craft shop someday. Their small family seemed perfect, but there was one concern that troubled Liana: her husband's best friend, a man named Roger Brown Berger. They had all attended high school together, with Roger and Bob becoming best friends since 7th grade. However, Roger had a troubled reputation as a drug dealer. Liana strongly opposed drugs and disapproved of her husband's friendship with him. She frequently expressed her concerns to Bob, urging him to end his association with Roger. Liana feared that Roger's involvement with drug dealers and his rough demeanor could negatively influence her husband. Regardless of her complaints, Bob didn't heed Liana's concerns, and he continued his friendship with Roger. Liana eventually realized she couldn't change their relationship and decided to let it be. Time passed swiftly for the family, and they soon celebrated little Erik's 5th birthday. A few days after the celebration, the couple planned a family outing for August 10, 1996. They intended to visit the bay along the river and enjoy making popcorn. Unbeknownst to them, the seemingly fun family trip would tragically end in disaster. Lieutenant Kevin Alva Stouffer from the Sweetwater County Sheriff's Department was on patrol on August 10, 1996, when he received a distressing message from dispatch. The call reported a man stating that his wife and child had fallen off a cliff. The 911 call had come from a dusty trail known as Last Dog Road, leading through the open desert to the head of the cliff. Responding swiftly, Lieutenant Alva Stouffer reached the scene. What he encountered was horrifying. Liana and her son Erik's disfigured and battered bodies were crumpled over the rocks at the base of the cliff. Reflecting on the sight, Lieutenant Alva Stouffer later said, "I didn't realize there was a cliff in that area of such magnitude. I initially thought the wife and child had fallen from a 15 to 20-foot cliff and were injured. To my shock, it was a towering ridge, and they had plunged a staggering 200 feet down to the rocks below. At the top, I encountered the young husband and father of the victims, 23-year-old Bob Duke, as other first responders and detectives arrived at the scene." Lieutenant Elvis Stouffer questioned Bob about the incident at the cliff, and he recounted the events, explaining that they had all gone out for a drive, visiting several locations before ending up at this particular spot. They then stopped on a ridge overlooking the Flaming Gorge Reservoir. While they were there, the family got out of the Jeep, and Erik began throwing rocks and chasing lizards with his mother beside him. Bob went to the car to get a soda. But with his back turned, he heard his wife scream his name. When he turned around, both Erik and his mother were gone. As Bob spoke, Lieutenant Elvis Stouffer noticed how quiet and reserved he was, recounting the tragic incident. Bob remained surprisingly calm and composed, lacking the expected shock. This demeanor raised a bit of suspicion, but the lieutenant reminded himself that people handle shock and grief differently. Bob explained to the lieutenant that the terrain was too steep for him to go down and check if his wife and child were still alive. However, he mentioned hearing his child choking on blood. By this time, the first responders had arrived, and they went down the cliff to reach the bodies. Lieutenant Alvis Stouffer observed how effortlessly the first responders descended, despite Bob claiming it was too difficult for him. Many questions filled the lieutenant's mind, wondering why Bob, who claimed he had never been to the cliff before, chose to park in such a risky and unsafe location. Many details didn't add up for the lieutenant, and he hoped a thorough investigation would bring clarity. After all the questions were asked, the first responders managed to retrieve and lift Liana and Erik's bodies up the cliff. Lieutenant Alvis Stouffer instinctively looked at Bob to gauge his reaction. It was an old habit he developed from years of experience at crime scenes, wanting to see how Bob would respond to the sight of his wife and child's bodies. However, Bob never reached out to them or attempted to hold them, as people often do in moments of grief. He simply let them be taken away. The heartbreaking news quickly spread through the small town of Green River, filling the streets with sorrow. The detectives initiated their investigation, questioning the victim's family and friends, including the grieving husband Bob. Despite the town's belief in Bob's innocence, the detectives remained skeptical, refusing to rule anyone out until the investigation concluded. As their inquiries continued, no incriminating evidence surfaced. The autopsy reports confirmed death by falling, showing no signs of foul play. With no new leads, the case eventually went cold. Most detectives began to accept the slip and fall explanation as there seemed to be no other plausible explanation for their deaths. Shortly after, Bob was no longer under suspicion. Even though a few detectives held different theories, the sheriff's department deemed their deaths a tragic accident, closing the case. The funerals for Liana and Erik took place after the investigation ended, with a large attendance, including Bob. He served as one of the pallbearers for Erik's coffin. They were laid to rest side by side on a hill overlooking the town. Many offered their sympathies to the young widower. In 1998, after the loss of his wife and child, Bob moved to Austin, Texas, to live with his brother Mike and start a new life. By January 1999, approximately 2.5 years had passed since the deaths of Liana and Erik. However, the case continued to haunt the mind of a specific detective, Detective Mon Meacham. He had pleaded with the sheriff's department to reconsider the case, despite it being outside his jurisdiction. However, they insisted the case was closed. Detective Meacham couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. He didn't buy the tragic accident story that the other investigators and the entire town had accepted. Numerous details about the case seemed questionable, and although he sensed that something was off, he couldn't quite pinpoint what it was. The lingering questions continued to trouble Detective Meacham. Then, 2.5 years after the case had been closed, he finally received an unexpected answer. On January 4, 1999, Detective Meacham received a frantic call from Roger Brownberger. Roger was in a state of terror, repeatedly saying, "They'll kill me! They'll kill me!" Meacham attempted to inquire who Roger meant by "they," but he didn't receive a clear response. Detective Meacham managed to calm Roger down, and Roger said, "I need to talk to you as soon as I can. I've got something super scary to tell you." So Detective Meacham got in his car and drove to the construction site where Roger worked. Once there, Roger got in the police car and told Detective Meacham a very disturbing story. Roger revealed that his old friend Bob Duke had been calling him from Houston. Initially, it was just small talk about work and what he and his brother Mike were up to, but their conversation soon took a dark turn. Bob wanted to know if Roger could help him acquire automatic weapons since he was working in a high-security building. According to Bob, certain individuals were targeted, and he saw an opportunity to profit from it. Roger believed Bob contacted him because he knew his drug dealer friends had connections and could obtain the guns. Though Roger wanted no part in Bob's request, he reluctantly agreed to help. Detective Meacham listened intently as the frightened Roger paused briefly before continuing to recount the strange conversations. Roger revealed that Bob called him again a few weeks later with an even more disturbing request. Bob confessed to Roger that he had used up the $60,000 insurance money from his wife and child's deaths. He claimed that he and his brother Mike had devised a plan to make a significant amount of money quickly. Bob then hinted that Roger could assist them. Uncertain of their intentions, Roger hesitantly agreed and inquired about their plan. It was then that Bob shockingly revealed he would pay Roger $20,000 to kill his own parents. Roger, baffled and shocked, asked Bob to repeat himself. Bob calmly stated that his parents were destined to die, with or without Roger's involvement. Bob added that he recognized Roger's financial struggles, which was why he offered him the opportunity first. In that moment, Roger realized the gravity of the situation. Bob had already killed his wife and child and was now plotting to kill his own parents. Detective Meacham, shocked and intrigued by Roger's revelation, asked, "How do you know he killed his wife and child?" That's when Roger decided to share the unsettling details of another conversation he had with his friend Bob. On July 21, 1996, Roger recalled their conversation vividly. He recounted to the detective that he had been spending time with Bob, watching movies and talking. During their conversation, Bob suddenly turned to Roger and asked, "Would you kill my wife and child for $15,000? At first, Roger thought Bob was joking and laughed it off, telling him he had been watching too many movies. However, Bob was dead serious. A few days later, he approached Roger with a detailed plan. Bob explained, "Have you given any thought to that? We'll have about $20,000. I'll be barbecuing this Wednesday. I'll leave the rifle behind the shed, and you can shoot me in the arm. Then, shoot my wife and kid in the head and chest and take out as many neighborhood kids as you need to make it look less obvious." Horrified, Roger told Bob he was crazy and that the plan was utterly insane. Bob continued trying to convince his friend, assuring Roger that he would pay him with the insurance money he received from their deaths. Roger, in response, suggested that if Bob was unhappy, he should get a divorce. However, Bob explained he couldn't do that because his parents would hate him. They stopped discussing the matter after that day, and Roger assumed it was the end of it. But 3 weeks later, Liana and Erik were dead. Stunned, Detective Meacham blinked in disbelief at Roger's story. The person he had been trying to pin down for nearly 3 years had been under his nose this whole time. Without hesitation, he initiated an in-depth investigation into Bob Duke. James Robert Duke, born in 1973, was the son of school teachers Larry and Roberta Duke. He grew up alongside his older brother Mike Duke in a little red house on Bridger Street in Green River. Bob was a bright and diligent kid, excelling in school. In 7th grade, he got into a schoolyard fight with Roger Brownberger, leading to an unexpected friendship. From then on, the boys, along with Bob's truck, would go off-roading, chasing girls, drinking beer, and hunting rabbits. They also spent time at home watching murder-for-hire movies, often joking about becoming hitmen themselves. Despite his playful antics with Roger, Bob remained a focused and ambitious student who frequently spoke about leaving Green River behind and going to college after high school. When Bob fell in love with Liana Davidson and got her pregnant in high school, his dreams of leaving Green River were put on hold to provide for his new family. Bob took on the role of a professional carpet layer and built a reputation as one of the best in Sweetwater County. He was known for his diligence, hard work, and being a good husband and father. However, as time passed, Bob started feeling trapped in his marriage and began seeking a way out. Around this time, he asked Roger to kill his family for $20,000. When Roger refused, Bob took matters into his own hands, and his wife and child mysteriously died in an accident 3 weeks later. Following Roger's statements, Detective Meacham enlisted the help of the FBI. With the cooperation of Roger and Meacham, FBI agent Todd Scott managed to record an incriminating call where Bob could be heard planning to kill his parents with a .22 caliber gun to collect their life insurance money. On January 8, 1999, 25-year-old Robert Duke was arrested at his home in Houston, and his 31-year-old brother Patrick, Mike, Duke was arrested minutes later at a business office. The recorded evidence enabled the FBI to swiftly conclude the case. In an effort to spare their parents the pain of a trial, the brothers pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit murder. Bob Duke was sentenced to 10 years, and Mike Duke received a 21-month sentence. The news sent shockwaves throughout the entire town of Green River. Agent Scott grappled with the difficult task of informing Larry and Roberta Duke that their only children had been plotting to kill them. The parents staunchly refused to believe the FBI, insisting that their sons were good boys wrongly accused. Meanwhile, while the brothers were serving their sentences, Detective Meacham reopened the case of Liana and Erik Duke and charged Bob Duke with their murder. James Robert Duke's trial began on August 12, 2002. Prosecutor Harold Money, Hahn and Detective Meacham were aware that the jury might doubt the credibility of their main witness, Roger Brownberger, due to his known involvement in drugs. They had to work tirelessly to convince the jury of Bob's guilt. Prosecutor Hahn began the trial by taking the jury to the cliff where he believed Bob had pushed his family to their death 6 years earlier. Prosecutor Harold Hahn addressed the jurors, saying, "As you can see, it's not a picnic area, it's a murder weapon." He argued that Bob Duke deliberately took his wife and son to that isolated cliff, located miles away from the nearest town, and pushed them over the edge, ensuring their deaths before notifying the authorities. Hahn emphasized that this act prevented Erik from uttering his dying breath, a feat impossible from the top of a 200-foot cliff. Roger was called to the stand and testified against his once close friend. He recounted their conversations, quoting Bob, "I've done family before and I didn't like it. Would you be interested in killing my parents?" As expected, defense lawyer Lavelle Taylor challenged Roger's testimony, dismissing it as a fabrication born from a drug-induced state of mind. Taylor argued that Roger Brownberger's history as a drug dealer and user cast doubt on his credibility. Taylor then told the jurors that Prosecutor Hahn was desperate for a conviction in a case lacking eyewitnesses. To counter the defense's argument, Prosecutor Harold Hahn pointed out the inconsistencies in Bob's recollection of the incident. He highlighted that in May or June of 1998, Bob had told his friend, Miss Dawn Gunther, that the cliff had given way, but he informed officers that they had slipped. Hahn then called Stephen Miller, a professor in botany and mycology at the University of Wyoming, to the stand. Miller testified that after his examination of the cliff in 2000, there was no evidence to suggest that the area in question had crumbled or fallen away on August 10, 1996. He informed the court that the last disturbance in that area was documented around 1960 to 1970. Hahn emphasized Bob's claim that he couldn't descend the cliff, contrasting it with the ease with which the first responders had done so. Bob's calm and emotionless demeanor was highlighted to the jury, with Prosecutor Harold Hahn emphasizing that Bob didn't exhibit the expected behavior of a grieving husband. Despite the mounting evidence against him, Bob maintained his innocence throughout the trial, claiming that his family had gotten lost and accidentally slipped. He defended his demeanor, stating, I'm sorry if my grief did not meet the expectations of the public." As the trial progressed, the jurors heard arguments from both the prosecutors and the defense. The prosecution was struggling to prove Bob's guilt convincingly. However, a pivotal moment occurred when the star witness, Crystal Robinson, took the stand. Crystal, with whom Bob had an inappropriate relationship beginning when she was just 13 years old, testified in court. She revealed that Bob had always expressed his desire to end his marriage. Bob had started seeing Crystal 3 years into his marriage, and he would take her to drink beer at the same cliff where he later killed his family. After Crystal's testimony, the prosecution had the crucial piece of evidence they needed. Her revelation about Bob's desire to avoid paying child support provided a motive for the murders. On August 23, 2002, following 8 hours of deliberations, Bob was found guilty on all charges. Then, on September 25, 2002, James Robert Duke was sentenced to life imprisonment for the murder of his family. When the verdict was announced, Ralph and Rose Davidson, Liana's parents, clung to each other, tears of relief and gratitude in their eyes. Ralph expressed his heartfelt thanks to Roger, saying, thank you for coming forward and for doing the right thing." Bob is currently serving his sentence at the Wyoming State Penitentiary located at 2900 South Hickory Boulevard in Rawlins, Wyoming. The twists and turns in the case of Bob Duke stand as a testament that justice may take time, but it ultimately prevails. Even though it took 6 years, justice was finally served in the end. But what do you think? Do you think Bob pushed his family that day? Or do you think he's truly innocent? Please share your thoughts with us in the comments section below. If you have any case suggestions, please leave them below, and until next time, stay safe and thanks for watching.